Okay, so if we take the beginning of this scene from Jurassic World Rebirth, where the girl grabs the raft and then assume the T-Rex just disappears or doesn't notice them, we can cut straight to this, and literally nothing is lost. And this is a serious problem because what it means is that this action set piece failed to do the two things that I think any action set piece or moment of spectacle should accomplish. The first being that it moves the plot into a new direction. You know, whenever characters are pushed into a certain action set piece, they should come out with the status quo changed. They should come out differently than the way they went in. This is just a classic rule of action storytelling. Just look at the original Jurassic Park where they go to visit the T-Rex escapes, and after everything is said and done, everything is changed. You know, characters are separated, characters are lost, everything is in a fundamentally different place than it was at the beginning. Even Jurassic World Rebirth seems to understand this, at least for some part of the movie. You know, take the first scene, the first action set piece where they hunt the Mosasaurus. You know, here you cannot take the beginning of the scene and cut straight to the ending without losing significant amounts of information, which means that the action itself was transformative for the story. It took the story in a new direction. It took the characters from this place and moved them into this one. But the raft sequence just doesn't do this at all. You know, the characters get into the boat, and by the end of the sequence, they're still in the boat. There's some suspense throughout the sequence, where it looks like the little girl is eaten for a moment, or they lose the boat, or whatever, but nothing really that puts them in a truly new direction. Ideally, you would even have more than one layer of transformation. You know, it's not just that characters go into an action scene trying to achieve one thing and then having another happen. No, preferably you have more than one thing change. You know, take that scene from The Lost World, for example, where the T-Rexes attack the camper or the vehicle that the main characters are in. You know, by the end of the sequence, when they are rescued by the hunters, it's not just that the status quo for the main characters has changed in the sense that they now lost their vehicle, that they lost one of their friends, that they're just completely at a loss compared to where they were at the start, but they're now also teaming up with these characters who were their antagonists for the earlier part of the movie. So it's not just that the characters are in a new place, but the character dynamics have also changed, and that's what I think makes that sequence still very interesting. But again, the raft sequence, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't separate anyone. It doesn't bring anyone together. It doesn't hurt or invoke some kind of other material change in the characters that are involved in the scene. It's just they get on the boat, they have a little scare, and by the end they're just still on the boat and they're floating down the river. You know, the whole interaction with the T-Rex is completely meaningless to any aspect of the story in this part. And this brings me to the second thing that the greatest action set pieces always manage to achieve, which is that they reveal character or theme. The raft sequence doesn't do either one, so I'm just going to limit myself to the simplest one, which is to reveal something about character. Again, Rebirth has an example of this where it does it right, which is again in that earlier set piece with the Mosasaurus. You know, there we're not just getting information that changes the plot, but it also gives us information that reveals the true nature of characters, or that reveals something that was hidden or that we didn't know about them. Mainly there's the lazy kid who the father was kind of looking down on as being a bad boyfriend and just this lazy passenger on that boat trip who suddenly has this heroic turn where he jumps after his girlfriend. You know, that changes our perspective of the character. And it changes the father's perspective on that character, which then becomes like a catalyst for the development of their relation later in the story. Another thing that happens in this sequence is that corporate guy who tries to prevent the girlfriend from phoning for help. You know, to him it's clearly more important that the mission remains a secret, and he even is willing to let her die to maintain that secret. And so, you know, that's not a bit of character information that gives us as the audience some info about who this guy is, and that also instills like a character conflict, which then comes back at the end of the movie. You know, that's what it means to reveal character in an action scene. It's where the action itself provokes the characters to reveal something about themselves that we otherwise wouldn't have seen as directly or as clearly, and that the other characters in the story also then come to understand. But again, in the raft sequence, there's nothing of character that is revealed. You know, the father has a moment where he's afraid he's losing his little girl, but, you know, that's not new information to us. We know the father is a caring father, or at least he doesn't want his children to die. So that's not exactly a revelation. That's not a meaningful point of suspense in the sense that it reveals something about the people involved in this sequence. You know, none of the character dynamics shift. There's no revelations. There's just nothing here, really. And so, lastly, why does this matter? Why can't we just enjoy the T-Rex running after the people and having that be a fun thing? Well, it's because without narrative meaning, all this action, all this spectacle, it just becomes mechanics. It's just empty nourishment that tricks you into having this brief dopamine hit by playing on your nostalgia. You know, this is the sequence that not only has the Tyrannosaurus from the original movies. I don't know if it's the literal same one, but it's, you know, it's the same iconic figure. And also, as some of the fans might know, this is the one sequence that got away from the original novel. This raft sequence was in the original book, and they had some plans, I think, to shoot it for the original movie, the original Jurassic Park, but they ended up cutting it out, and so it became the sequence that got away, in a sense. And so now we finally have it, and it's just there to showcase some kind of fandom, I guess. Again, it's a sequence, you can remove it entirely and you lose nothing about this story. There's just no added value to this scene. It's just empty noise, which is part of the reason why I was so harsh on this movie in my Letterboxd review, because I feel like it's not even trying anymore, you know. It's just banking on us being familiar with certain dinosaurs, being entertained enough by some new dinosaurs, and being swayed once more by the John Williams score that we've heard a dozen times, and the same ideas that we've been, you know, rehashing since the first movie. You know, it's the 7th movie in the franchise, and we're still doing the same thing, like, oh, man thinks they can control nature, but really he can't. You know, that's been the core idea of every Jurassic Park movie over the last 20, 30 years or so, and I'm just tired of movies that are not even trying to aspire to something more, that are not even trying to give me some new idea or just surprise me in some other way, you know. But I don't want to go on a whole rant about that, so I'm just going to leave it with this. If you do an action scene, make sure to make it meaningful, make it matter to the story, make it matter to the characters, and just don't have it be superfluous. Don't allow some guy like me to just completely cut it out of the story and lose nothing of value.